Section 12 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by J.W. McHale. Chapter 12, Book 6th, The Vision of the Underworld, Part 2. This realm rings with the triple-throated baying of vast Cerberus, couched huge in the cavern opposite, to whom the prophetess, seeing the serpents already bristling up on his neck, throws a cake made slumberous with honey and drugged grain. He, with threefold jaws gaping in ravenous hunger, catches it when thrown, and sinks to earth with monstrous body outstretched, and sprawling huge over all his den. The warder overwhelmed, Aeneas makes entrance, and quickly issues from the bank of the irremeable wave. Immediately wailing voices are loud in their ears, the souls of babies crying on the doorway sill, whom, torn from the breast and portionless in life's sweetness, a dark day cut off and drowned in bitter death. Hard by them are those condemned to death on false accusation. Neither indeed are these dwellings assigned without lot and judgment. Minos presides and shakes the urn. He summons a council of the silent people, and inquires of their lives and charges. Next in order have these mourners their place, whose own innocent hands dealt them death, who flung away their souls in hatred of the day. How fain were they now in upper air to endure their poverty and sore travail! It may not be. The unlovely pool locks them in her gloomy wave, and Styx pours her ninefold barrier between. And not far from here are shown stretching on every side the wailing fields, so they call them by name. Here they whom pitiless love hath wasted in cruel decay hide among untrodden ways, shrouded in embosoming myrtle thickets. Not death itself ends their distresses. In this region he discerns Phaedra and Procris, and woeful Eriphyle, showing on her the wounds of her merciless son, and Evadne and Pasiphae. Laodamia goes in their company, and she who was once Caeneus, and a man, now woman, and again returned by fate into her shape of old. Among whom Dido the Phoenician, fresh from her death wound, wandered in the vast forest. By her the Trojan heroes stood, and knew the dim form through the darkness, even as the moon to him who sees or thinks he sees her rising through the vapours. He let tears fall, and spoke to her lovingly and sweet. Alas, Dido, so the news was true that reached me. Thou didst perish, and the sword sealed thy doom. Ah me, was I the cause of thy death? By the stars I swear, by the heavenly powers and all that is sacred beneath the earth, unwillingly, O Queen, I left thy shore. But the gods, at whose orders now I pass through this shadowy place, this land of mouldering overgrowth and deep night, the gods' commands drove me forth, nor could I deem my departure would bring thee pain so great as this. Stay thy footstep, and withdraw not from our gaze. From whom fliest thou? The last speech of thee fate ordains me is this. In such words, and with starting tears, Aeneas soothed the burning and fierce-eyed soul. She turned away with looks fixed fast on the ground, stirred no more in countenance by the speech he essays than if she stood in iron flint or Marpesian stone. At length she started, and fled wrathfully into the shadowy woodland, where Sychaeus, her ancient husband, responds to her distresses and equals her affection. Yet Aeneas, dismayed by her cruel doom, follows her far on her way with pitying tears. Thence he pursues his appointed path, and now they trod those utmost fields where the renowned in war have their haunt apart. Here Tydeus meets him, here Parthenopaeus, glorious in arms, and the pallid phantom of Adrastus. Here the Dardanians long wept on earth and fallen in the war. Sighing, he discerns all their long array, Glaucus and Medon and Thursilocus, the three children of Antenor, and Polyphetes, Ceres' priest, and Idaeus, yet charioted, yet grasping his arms. The souls throng round him to right and left, nor is one look enough. Lingering delighted, they pace by his side, and inquire wherefore he is come. But the princes of the Grecians and Agamemnon's armies, when they see him glittering in arms through the gloom, hurry terror-stricken away. Some turn backward, as when of old they fled to the ships. Some raise their voice faintly, and gasp out a broken, ineffectual cry. And here he saw Deiphobus, son of Priam, with face cruelly torn, face and both hands, and ears lopped from his mangled temples, and nostrils maimed by a shameful wound. Barely he knew the cowering form that hid its dreadful punishment. Then he springs to accost it in familiar speech. Deiphobus, mighty in arms, seed of Teucer's royal blood, whose wantonness of vengeance was so cruel, who was allowed to use thee thus? Rumour reached me that on that last night, outwearied with endless slaughter, thou hadst sunk on the heap of mingled carnage. Then mine own hand reared an empty tomb on the Rhoetian shore, mine own voice thrice called aloud upon thy ghost. Thy name and armour keep the spot. Thee, O my friend, I could not see, nor lay in the native earth I left. Whereto the son of Priam: in nothing, O my friend, wert thou wanting. Thou hast paid the full to Deiphobus and the dead man's shade, but me my fate and the Laconian woman's murderous guilt thus dragged down to doom. These are the records of her leaving. For how we spent that last night in delusive gladness thou knowest, and must needs remember too well. When the fated horse leapt down the steep towers of Troy, bearing armed infantry for the burden of its womb, she, in feigned procession, led round our Phrygian women with Bacchic cries. Herself she upreared a mighty flame amid them, and called the Grecians out of the fortress height. Then was I fast in mine ill-fated bridal chamber, deep asleep and outworn with my charge, and lay overwhelmed in slumber sweet and profound, and most like to easeful death. Meanwhile that crown of wives removes all the arms from my dwelling, and slips out the faithful sword from beneath my head. She calls Menelaus into the house, and flings wide the gateway. Be sure she hoped her lover would magnify the gift, and so she might quench the fame of her ill deeds of old. Why do I linger? They burst into the chamber, they and the Aeolid, counsellor of crime, in their company. Gods, recompense the Greeks even thus, if with righteous lips I call for vengeance. But come, tell in turn what hap hath brought thee hither yet alive. Comest thou driven on ocean wanderings, or by promptings from heaven? Or what fortune keeps thee from rest, that thou shouldst draw nigh these sad sunless dwellings, this disordered land? In this change of talk Dawn had already crossed heaven's mid-axle on her rose-charioted way, and happily had they thus drawn out all the allotted time. But the Sibyl made brief warning speech to her companion. Night falls, Aeneas, we waste the hours in weeping. Here is the place where the road disparts. By this that runs to the right, under great Dis' city, is our path to Elysium. But the leftward wreaks vengeance on the wicked, and sends them to unrelenting hell. But Deiphobus, be not angered, mighty princess, I will depart, I will refill my place, and return into darkness. Go, glory of our people, go, enjoy a fairer fate than mine. Thus much he spoke, and on the word turned away his footsteps. Aeneas looks swiftly back, and sees beneath the cliff on the left hand a wide city, girt with a triple wall and encircled by a racing river of boiling flame, Tartarian Phlegethon, that echoes over its rolling rocks. In front is the gate, huge and pillared with solid adamant, that no warring force of men nor the very habitants of heaven may avail to overthrow. It stands up, a tower of iron, and Tisiphone, sitting girt in blood-stained pall, keeps sleepless watch at the entry by night and day. Hence moans are heard, and fierce lashes resound, with the clank of iron and dragging chains. Aeneas stopped and hung dismayed at the tumult. What shapes of crime I hear? Declare, O maiden, or what the punishment that pursues them? And all this upsurging wail. Then the soothsayer thus began to speak: Illustrious chief of Troy, no pure foot may tread these guilty courts, but to me Hecate herself, when she gave me rule over the groves of Avernus, taught how the gods punish, and guided me through all her realm. Gnosian Rhadamanthus here holds unrelaxing sway, chastises secret crime revealed, and exacts confession, wheresoever in the upper world one vainly exultant in stolen guilt hath till the dusk of death kept clear from the evil he wrought. Straightway avenging Tisiphone, girt with her scourge, tramples down the shivering sinners, menaces them with the grim snakes in her left hand, and summons forth her sisters in merciless train. Then at last the sacred gates are flung open and grate on the jarring hinge. Markest thou what sentry is seated in the doorway? What shape guards the threshold? More grim within sits the monstrous Hydra with her 50 black yawning throats, and Tartarus' self gapes sheer, and strikes into the gloom through twice the space that one looks upward to Olympus and the skyey heaven. Here earth's ancient children, the Titans' brood, hurled down by the thunderbolt, lie wallowing in the abyss. Here likewise I saw the twin Aloids, enormous of frame, who essayed with violent hands to pluck down high heaven and thrust Jove from his upper realm. Likewise I saw Salmoneus in the cruel payment he gives for mocking Jove's flame and Olympus' thunders. Borne by 4 horses and brandishing a torch, he rode in triumph midway through the populous city of Grecian Elis, and claimed for himself the worship of deity. Madman, who would mimic the storm cloud and the inimitable bolt with brass that rang under his trampling horse hoofs. But the Lord omnipotent hurled his shaft through thickening clouds, no firebrand his nor smoky glare of torches, and dashed him headlong in the fury of the whirlwind. Therewithal Tityos might be seen, fosterling of earth, the mother of all, whose body stretches over 9 full acres, and a monstrous vulture with crooked beak eats away the imperishable liver and the entrails that breed in suffering, and plunges deep into the breast that gives it food and dwelling. Nor is any rest given to the fibres that ever grow anew. Why tell of the Lapithae, of Ixion and Pirithous, over whom a stone hangs just slipping, and just as though it fell, or the high banqueting couches gleam golden pillared, and the feast is spread in royal luxury before their faces. Couched hard by, the eldest of the Furies wards the tables from their touch, and rises with torch upreared and thunderous lips. Here are they who hated their brethren while life endured, or struck a parent, or entangled a client in wrong, or who brooded alone over found treasure and shared it not with their fellows. This is the greatest multitude of all. And they who were slain for adultery, and who followed unrighteous arms, and feared not to betray their master's plighted hand. Imprisoned they await their doom. Seek not to be told that doom, that fashion of fortune wherein they are sunk. Some roll a vast stone, or hang outstretched on the spokes of wheels. Hapless Theseus sits, and shall sit for ever, And Phlegeus in his misery gives counsel to all, and witnesses aloud through the gloom, "Learn by this warning to do justly, and not to slight the gods. This man sold his country for gold, and laid her under a tyrant's sway. He set up and pulled down laws at a price. This other forced his daughter's bridal chamber and a forbidden marriage. All dared some monstrous wickedness, and had success in what they dared. Not had I 100 tongues, 100 mouths, and a voice of iron, could I sum up all the shapes of crime, or name over all their punishments." Thus spoke Phoebus' long-lived priestess. Then, "But come now," she cries, "haste on the way, and perfect the service begun. Let us go faster. I descry the ramparts cast in Cyclopean furnaces, and in front the arched gateway, where they bid us lay the gifts foreordained." She ended, and advancing side by side along the shadowy ways, they pass over and draw nigh the gates. Aeneas makes entrance, and sprinkling his body with fresh water, plants the bough full in the gateway. Now at length, this fully done, and the service of the goddess perfected, they came to the happy place, the green pleasances and blissful seats of the fortunate woodlands. Here an ampler air clothes the meadows in lustrous sheen, and they know their own sun and a starlight of their own. Some exercise their limbs in tournament on the greensward, content in games, and wrestle on the yellow sand. Some dance with beating footfall and lips that sing. With them is the Thracian priest in sweeping robe, and makes music to their measures with the notes sevenfold interval, the notes struck now with his fingers, now with his ivory rod. Here is Teucer's ancient brood, a generation excellent in beauty, high-hearted heroes born in happier years, Ilus and Assaracus and Dardanus, founder of Troy. Afar he marvels at the armour and chariots, empty of their lords. Their spears stand fixed in the ground, and their unyoked horses pasture at large over the plain. Their life's delight in chariot and armour, their care in pasturing their sleek horses, follows them in like wise low under earth. Others, lo, he beholds feasting on the sward to right and left, and singing in chorus the glad paean cry, within a scented laurel grove, whence Eridanus river surges upward, full volumed through the wood. Here is the band of them who bore wounds in fighting for their country, and they who were pure in priesthood while life endured, and the good poets whose speech abased not Apollo, and they who made life beautiful by the arts of their invention, and who won by service a memory among men, the brows of all girt with the snow-white fillet. To their encircling throng the Sibyl spoke thus, and to Musaeus before them all, for he is midmost of all the multitude, and stands out head and shoulders among their upward gaze. "Tell, O blissful souls, and thou, poet most gracious, what region, what place hath Anchises for his own? For his sake are we come, and have sailed across the wide rivers of Erebus." And to her the hero thus made brief reply: "None hath a fixed dwelling. We live in the shady woodlands. Soft swelling banks and meadows fresh with streams are our habitation. But you, if this be your heart's desire, scale this ridge, and I will even now set you on an easy pathway." He spoke, and paced on before them, and from above shows the shining plains. Thereafter they leave the mountain heights. But Lord Anchises, deep in the green valley, was musing in earnest survey over the imprisoned souls destined to the daylight above, and haply reviewing his beloved children and all the tale of his people, them and their fates and fortunes, their works and ways. And he, when he saw Aeneas advancing to meet him over the greensward, stretched forth both hands eagerly, while tears rolled over his cheeks, and his lips parted in a cry, "Art thou come at last? And hath thy love, O child of my desire, conquered the difficult road? Is it granted, O my son, to gaze on thy face, and hear and answer in familiar tones? Thus indeed I forecast in spirit, counting the days between, nor hath my care misled me. What lands, what space of seas hast thou traversed to reach me? Through what surge of perils, O my son? How I dreaded the realm of Libya might work thee harm." And he, "Thy melancholy phantom, thine, O my father, came before me often and often, and drove me to steer to these portals. My fleet is anchored on the Tyrrhenian brine. Give thine hand to clasp, O my father, give it, and withdraw not from our embrace." So spoke he, his face wet with abundant weeping. Thrice there did he essay to fling his arms about his neck. Thrice the phantom, vainly grasped, fled out of his hands, even as light wind, and most like to fluttering sleep. Meanwhile Aeneas sees deep withdrawn in the covert of the vale a woodland and rustling forest thickets, and the river of Lethe that floats past their peaceful dwellings. Around it flitted nations and peoples innumerable, even as in the meadows when in clear summer weather bees settle on the variegated flowers and stream round the snow-white lilies, all the plain is murmurous with their humming. Aeneas starts at the sudden view, and asks the reason he knows not. What are those spreading streams, or who are they whose vast train fills the banks? Then Lord Anchises: "Souls, for whom second bodies are destined and due, drink at the wave of the Lethean stream, the heedless water of long forgetfulness. These of a truth have I long desired to tell and show thee face to face, and number all the generation of thy children, that so thou mayest the more rejoice with me in finding Italy. O father, must we think that any souls travel hence into upper air, and return again to bodily fetters? Why this their strange sad longing for the light?" "I will tell," rejoins Anchises, "nor will I hold thee in suspense, my son." And he unfolds all things in order one by one. First of all, heaven and earth and the liquid fields, the shining orb of the moon and the Titanian star, doth a spirit sustain inly, and a soul shed abroad in them sways all their members and mingles in the mighty frame. Thence is the generation of man and beast, the life of winged things, and the monstrous forms that ocean breeds under his glittering floor. Those seeds have fiery force and divine birth, so far as they are not clogged by the taint of the body and dulled by earthy frames and limbs ready to die. Hence is it they fear and desire, sorrow and rejoice, nor can they pierce the air while barred in the blind darkness of their prison house. Nay, and when the last ray of life is gone, not yet, alas, does all their woe, nor do all the plagues of the body wholly leave them free, and needs must be that many a long ingrained evil should take root marvellously deep. Therefore they are schooled in punishment, and pay all the forfeit of a lifelong ill. Some are hung stretched to the viewless winds, some have the taint of guilt washed out beneath the dreary deep, or burned away in fire. We suffer, each a several ghost. Thereafter we are sent to the broad spaces of Elysium, some few of us to possess the happy fields, till length of days completing time's circle takes out the ingrained soilure, and leaves untainted the ethereal sense and pure spiritual flame. All these before thee, when the wheel of 1,000 years hath come fully round, a god summons in vast train to the river of Lethe. that so they may regain in forgetfulness the slopes of upper earth, and begin to desire to return again into the body. Anchises ceased, and leads his son and the Sibyl likewise amid the assembled murmurous throng, and mounts a hillock whence he might scan all the long ranks and learn their countenances as they came. Now come, the glory hereafter to follow our Dardanian progeny, the posterity to abide in our Italian people, illustrious souls and inheritors of our name to be. These will I rehearse, and instruct thee of thy destinies. He yonder, seest thou? The warrior, leaning on his pointless spear, holds the nearest place allotted in our groves, and shall rise first into the air of heaven from the mingling blood of Italy, Silvius of Alban name, the child of thine age, whom late in thy length of days thy wife Lavinia shall nurture in the woodland, king and father of kings. From him in Alba the long shall our house have dominion. He next him is Procas, glory of the Trojan race, and Capys and Numitor, and he who shall renew thy name, Silvius Aeneas, eminent alike in goodness or in arms, if ever he shall receive his kingdom in Alba. Men of men, see what strength they display, and wear the civic oak shading their brows. They shall establish Nomentum and Gabii in Fidena city, they the Collatine hill fortress, Pometii, and the fort of Inuus, Bola and Cora. These shall be names that are now nameless land. Nay, Romulus likewise, seed of Mavos, shall join his grandsire's company, from his mother Ilia's nurture and Assaracus' blood. Seest thou how the twin plumes straighten on his crest, and his father's own emblazonment already marks him for upper air? Behold, O son, by his augury shall Rome the renowned fill earth with her empire and heaven with her pride, and gird about 7 fortresses with her single wall, prosperous mother of men. Even as Our Lady of Berecyntus rides in her chariot turret-crowned through the Phrygian cities, glad in the gods she hath borne, clasping 100 of her children's children, all habitants of heaven, all dwellers on the upper heights. Hither now bend thy twin-eyed gaze. Behold this people, the Romans that are thine. Here is Caesar, and all Iulius' prosperity that shall arise under the mighty cope of heaven. Here is he of whose promise once and again thou hearest, Caesar Augustus, a god's son, who shall again establish the ages of gold in Latium over the fields that once were Saturn's realm, and carry his empire afar to Garamant and Indian, to the land that lies beyond our stars, beyond the sun's year-long ways, where Atlas the sky-bearer wheels on his shoulder the glittering star-spangled pole. Before his coming, even now the kingdoms of the Caspian shudder at oracular answers, and the Meotic land and the mouths of sevenfold Nile flutter in alarm. Nor indeed did Alcides traverse such spaces of earth, though he pierced the brazen-footed deer, or though he stilled the Erymanthian woodlands and made Lerna tremble at his bow; nor he who sways his team with reins of vine, Liber the conqueror, when he drives his tigers from Nysa's lofty crest. And do we yet hesitate to give valour scope in deeds, or shrink in fear from setting foot on Ausonian land? Ah, and who is he apart, marked out with sprays of olive, offering sacrifice? I know the locks and hoary chin of the King of Rome, who shall establish the infant city in his laws, sent from little Cures' sterile land to the majesty of empire. To him Tullus shall next succeed, who shall break the peace of his country, and stir to arms men rusted from war, and armies now disused to triumphs. And hard on him over-vaunting Ancus follows, even now too elate in popular breath. Wilt thou see also the Tarquin kings, and the haughty soul of Brutus the Avenger, and the Fasces regained? He shall first receive a consul's power and the merciless axes. And when his children would stir fresh war, the father, for fair freedom's sake, shall summon them to doom. Unhappy! Yet howsoever posterity shall take the deed, love of country and limitless passion for honour shall prevail. Nay, behold apart the Decii and the Drusi, Torquatus with his cruel axe, and Camillus returning with the standards. Yonder souls likewise, whom thou discernest gleaming in equal arms, at one now, while shut in night, ah me, what mutual war, what battle lines and bloodshed shall they arouse, so they attain the light of the living! Father-in-law descending from the Alpine barriers and the fortress of the dweller alone, son-in-law facing him with the embattled east. Nay, O my children, harden not your hearts to such warfare, neither turn upon her own heart the mastering knight of your country. And thou, be thou first to forgive, who drawest thy descent from heaven. Cast down the weapons from thy hand, O blood of mine. He shall drive his conquering chariot to the Capitoline height, triumphant over Corinth, glorious in Achaeans' slaughter. He shall uproot Argos and Agamemnonian Mycenae, and the Achaeads' own heir, the seed of Achilles mighty in arms, avenging his ancestors in Troy in Minerva's polluted temple. Who might leave thee, lordly Cato, or thee, Cossus, to silence? Who the Gracchan family, or these two sons of the Scipios, a double thunderbolt of war, Libya's bale, and Fabricius, potent in poverty, or thee, Serranus, sowing in the furrow? Whither whirl you me all breathless, O Fabii? Thou art he, the most mighty, the one man whose lingering retrieves our state. Others shall beat out the breathing bronze to softer lines, I believe it well, shall draw living lineaments from the marble. The cause shall be more eloquent on their lips. Their pencil shall portray the pathways of heaven, and tell the stars in their arising. Be thy charge, O Roman, to rule the nations in thine empire. This shall be thine art, to lay down the law of peace, to be merciful to the conquered, and beat the haughty down. Thus Lord Anchises, and as they marvel, he so pursues: Look how Marcellus the conqueror marches glorious in the splendid spoils, towering high above them all. He shall stay the Roman state, reeling beneath the invading shock, shall ride down Carthaginian and insurgent Gaul, and a third time hang up the captured armour before Lord Quirinus. And at this Aeneas, for he saw going by his side one excellent in beauty and glittering in arms, but his brow had little cheer, and his eyes looked down. Who, O my father, is he who thus attends him on his way? Son or other of his children's princely race? How his comrades murmur around him, how goodly of presence he is! But dark night flutters round his head with melancholy shade. Then Lord Anchises with welling tears began: O my son, ask not of the great sorrow of thy people. Him shall fate but show to earth, and suffer not to stay further. Too mighty, lords of heaven, did you deem the brood of Rome, had this your gift been abiding. What moaning of men shall arise from the field of Mavos by the imperial city? What a funeral trail shalt thou see, O Tiber, as thou flowest by the new-made grave! Neither shall the boyhood of any Ilian race raise his Latin forefathers' hope so high, nor shall the land of Romulus ever boast of any fosterling like this. Alas his goodness, alas his antique honour, and right hand invincible in war! None had faced him unscathed in armed shock, whether he met the foe on foot, or ran his spurs into the flanks of his foaming horse. Ah me, the pity of thee, O boy! If in any wise thou breakest the grim bar of fate, thou shalt be Marcellus. Give me lilies in full hands, let me strew bright blossoms, and these gifts at least let me lavish on my descendant's soul, and do the unavailing service. Thus they wander up and down over the whole region of broad vaporous plains, and scan all the scene. And when Anchises had led his son over it, each point by each, and kindled his spirit with passion for the glories on their way. He tells him thereafter of the war he next must wage, and instructs him of the Laurentine peoples and the city of Latinus, and in what wise each task may be turned aside or borne. There are twin portals of sleep, whereof the one is fabled of horn, and by it real shadows are given easy outlet. The other, shining white, of polished ivory, but false visions issue upward from the ghostly world. With these words then Anchises follows forth his son and the Sibyl together there, and dismisses them by the ivory gate. He pursues his way to the ships, and revisits his comrades, then bears on to Caeta's haven straight along the shore. The anchor is cast from the prow, the sterns are grounded on the beach. End of section 12.
Section 13 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lawrence. The Aeneid by Virgil. Translated by J.W. McHale. Chapter 7. The Landing in Latium and the Role of the Armies of Italy. Part 1. Thou also, Caeta, nurse of Aeneas, gavest our shores an everlasting renown in death, and still thine honour haunts thy resting place, and a name in broad Hesperia, if that be glory, marks thy dust. But when the last rites are duly paid, and the mound smoothed over the grave, good Aeneas, now the high seas are hushed, bears on under sail, and leaves his haven. Breezes blow into the night, and the white moonshine speeds them on. The sea glitters in her quivering radiance. Soon they skirt the shores of Circe's land, where the rich daughter of the sun makes her untrodden groves echo with ceaseless song, and her stately house glows night long with burning odorous cedar wood, as she runs over her delicate web with the ringing comb. Hence are heard afar angry cries of lions chafing at their fetters and roaring in the deep night. Bears and bristly swine rage in their pens, and vast shapes of wolves howl, whom with her potent herbs the deadly divine Circe had disfashioned face and body into wild beasts from the likeness of men. But lest the good Trojans might suffer so dread a change, might enter her haven or draw nigh the ominous shores, Neptune filled their sails with favourable winds, and gave them escape, and bore them past the seething shallows. And now the sea reddened with shafts of light, and high in heaven the yellow dawn shone rose-charioted. When the winds fell, and every breath sank suddenly, and the oar blades toil through the heavy ocean floor. And on this Aeneas descries from sea a mighty forest. Midway in it the pleasant Tiber stream breaks to sea in swirling eddies laden with yellow sand. Around and above fowl many in sort, that haunt his banks and river channel, solaced heaven with song, and flew about the forest. He orders his crew to bend their course and turn their prows to land, and glides joyfully into the shady river. Forth now, Erato, and I will enfold who were the kings, what the tides of circumstance, how it was with ancient Latium, when first that foreign army drew their fleet ashore on Ausonia's coast. I will recall the preluding of battle. Thou, divine one, inspire thou thy poet. I will tell of grim wars, tell of embattled lines, of kings whom honour drove on death, of the Tyrrhenian forces, and all Hesperia enrolled in arms. A greater history opens before me, a greater work, I essay. Latinus the king, now growing old, ruled in a long peace over quiet tilth and town. He, men say, was sprung of Faunus and the nymph Marica of Laurentum. Faunus's father was Picus, and he boasts himself Saturn, thy son. Thou art the first source of their blood. Son of his by divine ordinance and male descent was none, cut off in the early spring of youth. One alone kept the household and its august home, a daughter now ripe for a husband, and of full years for marriage. Many wooed her from wide Latium and all Ausonia. Fairest and foremost of all is Turnus, of long and lordly ancestry. But boding sides from heaven, many and terrible, bar the way. Within the palace, in the lofty inner courts, was a laurel of sacred foliage, guarded in awe through many years, which Lord Latinus, it was said, himself found and dedicated to Phoebus when first he would build his citadel, and from it gave his settlers their name Laurentines. High atop of it, wonderful to tell, bees, borne with loud humming across liquid air, girt it thickly about, and with interlinked feet hung in a sudden swarm from the leafy bough. Straightway the prophet cries, I see a foreigner draw nigh, an army from the same quarter seek the same quarter, and reign high in our fortress. Furthermore, while maiden Lavinia stands beside her father, feeding the altars with holy fuel, she was seen, O horror, to catch fire in her long tresses, and burn with flickering flame in all her array, her queenly hair lit up her jewelled circlet, till, enwreathed in smoke and lurid light, she scattered fire over all the palace. That sight was rumoured wonderful and terrible. Herself, they prophesied, she should be glorious in fame and fortune, but a great war was foreshadowed for her people. But the king, troubled by the omen, visits the oracle of his father Faunus the soothsayer, and the groves deep under Albunea, where, queen of the woods, she echoes from her holy well, and breathes forth a dim and deadly vapour. Hence do the tribes of Italy and all the Oenotrian land seek answers in perplexity. Hither the priest bears his gifts, and when he hath lain down and sought slumber under the silent night on the spread fleeces of slaughtered sheep, sees many flitting phantoms of wonderful wise, hears manifold voices, and attains converse of the gods, and hath speech with Acheron and the deep tract of hell. Here then, likewise seeking an answer, Lord Latinus paid fit sacrifice of 100 woolly ewes, and lay couched on the strewn fleeces they had worn. Out of the lofty grove a sudden voice was uttered. Seek not, O my child, to unite thy daughter in Latin espousals, nor trust her to the bridal chambers ready to thine hand. Foreigners shall come to be thy sons, whose blood shall raise our name to heaven, and the children of whose race shall see, where the circling sun looks on either ocean, all the rolling world swayed beneath their feet. This his father Faunus' answer and counsel, given in the silent night, Latinus restrains not in his lips, but wide-flitting rumour had already borne it round among the Ausonian cities, when the children of Laomedon moored their fleet to the grassy slope of the river bank. Aeneas, with the foremost of his captains, and fair Iülus, lay them down under the boughs of a high tree, and array the feast. They spread wheaten cakes along the sward under their meats, so Jove on high prompted, and crowned the platter of corn with wilding fruits. Here, haply, when the rest was spent, and scantness of food set them to eat their thin bread, and with hand and venturous teeth do violence to the round cakes fraught with fate, and spare not the flattened squares. Ha! Are we eating our tables too? Cries Iülus, jesting, and stops. At once that accent heard set their toils a limit, and at once as he spoke his father caught it from his lips, and hushed him in amazement at the omen. Straightway, Hail, O land, he cries, my destined inheritance, and hail, O household gods, faithful to your Troy. Here is home, this is our native country. For my father Anchises, now I remember it, bequeathed me this secret of fate. When hunger shall drive thee, O son, to consume thy tables where the feast fails, on the unknown shores whither thou shalt sail, then, though outwearied, hope for home, and there at last let thine hand remember to set thy house's foundations and bulwarks. This was the hunger, this the last that awaited us, to set the promised end to our desolations. Up then, and, glad with the first sunbeam, let us explore and search all abroad from our harbour. What is the country? Who its habitants? Where is the town of the nation? Now pour your cups to Jove, and call in prayer on Anchises our father, setting the wine again upon the board. So speaks he, and binding his brows with a leafy bough, he makes supplication to the genius of the ground, and the earth first of deities, and the nymphs and the rivers yet unknown. then calls on night and night's rising signs, and next on Jove of Ida, and Our Lady of Phrygia, and on his twain parents, in heaven and in the underworld. And this the Lord omnipotent thrice thundered sharp from high heaven, and with his own hand shook out for a sign in the sky a cloud ablaze with luminous shafts of gold. A sudden rumour spreads among the Trojan army that the day is come to found their destined city. Emulously they renew the feast, and, glad at the high omen, array the flagons and engarland the wine. Soon as the morrow bathed the lands in its dawning light, they part to search out the town and the borders and shores of the nation. These are the pools and spring of Numicus. This is the Tiber river. Here dwell the brave Latins. Then the seed of Anchises commands 100 envoys chosen of every degree to go to the stately royal city, all with the wreathed boughs of Pallas, to bear him gifts and desire grace for the Teucrians. Without delay they hasten on their message and advance with swift step. Himself he traces the city walls with a shallow trench, and builds on it, and in fashion of a camp girdles this first settlement on the shore with mound and battlements. And now his men had traversed their way, they espied the towers and steep roofs of the Latins, and drew near the wall. Before the city boys and men in their early bloom exercise on horseback, and break in their teams on the dusty ground, or draw ringing bows, or hurl tough javelins from the shoulder, and contend in running and boxing. When a messenger, riding forward, brings news to the ears of the aged king that mighty men are come thither in unknown raiment, he gives orders to call them within the house, and takes his seat in the midst on his ancestral throne. His house, stately and vast, crowned the city, upreared on 100 columns, once the palace of Laurentian Picus, amid awful groves of ancestral sanctity. Here their kings receive the inaugural sceptre, and have the fasces first raised before them. This temple was their senate house, this their sacred banqueting hall. Here, after sacrifice of rams, the elders were wont to sit down at long tables. Further, there stood a row in the entry images of the forefathers of old in ancient cedar, Italus and Lord Sabinus, planter of the vine, still holding in show the curved pruning hook, and grey Saturn, and the likeness of Janus the double-facing, and the rest of their primal kings, and they who had borne wounds of war in fighting for their country. Armour besides hangs thickly on the sacred doors, captured chariots and curved axes, helmet crests and massy gateway bars, lances and shields, and beaks torn from warships. He too sat there, with the divining rod of Quirinus, girt in the short augural gown, and carrying on his left arm the sacred shield, Picus the tamer of horses, he whom Circe, desperate with amorous desire, smote with her golden rod, and turned by her poisons into a bird with patches of colour on his wings. Of such wise was the temple of the gods, wherein Latinus, sitting on his father's seat, summoned the Teucrians to his house and presence, and when they entered in, he thus opened with placid mien: "Tell, O Dardanians, for we are not ignorant of your city and race, nor unheard of do you bend your course overseas, what seek you? What the cause, or whereof the need, that hath borne you over all these blue waterways to the Ausonian shore? Whether wandering in your course, or tempest driven, such perils manifold on the high seas do sailors suffer, you have entered the river banks and lie in harbour. Shun not our welcome, and be not ignorant that the Latins are Saturn's people, whom no laws fetter to justice, upright of their own free will, and the custom of the god of old. And now I remember, though the story is dimmed with years, thus Auruncan elders told how Dardanus, born in our country, made his way to the towns of Phrygian Ida, and to the Thracian Samos that is now called Samothrace. Here was the home he left, Tyrrhenian Corythus, and now the palace of heaven, glittering with golden stars, enthrones and adds him to the ranged altars of the gods." He ended, and Ilioneus pursued his speech with these words: "King, Faunus' illustrious progeny, neither hath black tempest driven us with stress of waves to shelter in your lands, nor hath star or shore misled us on the way we went. Of set purpose and willing mind do we draw nigh this thy city, outcasts from a realm once the greatest that the sun looked on as he came from Olympus's utmost border. From Jove hath our race beginning. In Jove the men of Dardania rejoice as ancestor. Our king himself, of Jove's supreme race, Aeneas of Troy, hath sent us to thy courts. How terrible the tempest that burst from fierce Mycenae over the plains of Ida! Driven by what fate Europe and Asia met in the shock of two worlds, even he hath heard who is sundered in the utmost land where the ocean surge recoils, and he whom stretching midmost of the four zones, the zone of the intolerable sun holds in severance. Borne by that flood over many desolate seas, we crave a scant dwelling for our country's gods, an unmolested landing place, and the air and water that are free to all. We shall not disgrace the kingdom, nor will the rumour of your renown be lightly gone, or the grace of all you have done fade away, nor will Ausonia be sorry to have taken Troy to her breast. By the fortunes of Aeneas I swear, by that right hand mightily, whether tried in friendship or in warlike arms, many and many a people and nation scorn us not because we advance with hands proffering chaplets and words of supplication, hath sought us for ourself and desired our alliance. But yours is the land that heaven's high ordinance drove us forth to find. Hence sprung Dardanus, hither Apollo recalls us, and pushes us on with imperious orders to Tyrrhenian Tiber and the holy pools of Numicus' spring. Further, he presents to thee these small guerdons of our past estate, relics saved from burning Troy. From this gold did Lord Anchises pour libation at the altars. This was Priam's array when he delivered statutes to the nations assembled in order, the sceptre, the sacred mitre, the raiment wrought by the women of Ilium. At these words of Ilioneus, Latinus holds his countenance in a steady gaze, and stays motionless on the floor, casting his intent eyes around. Nor does the embroidered purple so move the king, nor the sceptre of Priam, as his daughter's marriage and the bridal chamber absorb him, and the oracle of ancient Faunus stirs deep in his heart. This is he, the wanderer from a foreign home, foreshewn of fate for his son, and called to a realm of equal dominion, whose race should be excellent in valour, and their might overbear all the world. At last he speaks with good cheer. The gods prosper our undertaking and their own augury. What thou desirest, Trojan, shall be given, nor do I spurn your gifts. While Latinus reigns, you shall not lack foison of rich land, nor Troy's own riches. Only let Aeneas himself come hither, if desire of us be so strong, if he be in haste to join our friendship and be called our ally. Let him not shrink in terror from a friendly face. A term of the peace for me shall be to touch your monarch's hand. Do you now convey in answer my message to your king. I have a daughter whom the oracles of my father's shrine and many a celestial token alike forbid me to unite with one of our own nation. Sons shall come, they prophesy, from foreign coasts. Such is the destiny of Latium, whose blood shall exalt our name to heaven. He it is on whom fate calls. This I think, this I choose, if there be any truth in my soul's foreshadowing. Thus he speaks, and chooses horses for all the company. 300 stood sleek in their high stalls. For all the Teucrians in order he straightway commands them to be let forth, fleet-footed, covered with embroidered purple. Golden chains hang drooping over their chests, golden their housings, and they champ on bits of ruddy gold. For the absent Aeneas a chariot, and pair of chariot horses of celestial breed, with nostrils breathing flame, of the race of those which subtle Circe bred by slight on her father, the bastard issue of a stolen union. With these gifts and words the Aeneadae ride back from Latinus carrying peace. And lo, the fierce wife of Jove was returning from Inachian Argos, and held her way along the air, when out of the distant sky, far as from Sicilian Pacinus, she espied the rejoicing of Aeneas and the Dardanian fleet. She sees them already house-building, already trusting in the land, their ships left empty. She stops, shot with sharp pain. Then shaking her head, she pours forth these words. Ah, hated brood, and doom of the Phrygians that thwarts our doom! Could they perish on the Sigean plains? Could they be ensnared when taken? Did the fires of Troy consume her people? Through the midst of armies and through the midst of flames they have found their way. But, I think, My deity lays at last outwearied, or my hatred sleeps and is satisfied? Nay, it is I who have been fierce to follow them over the waves when hurled from their country, and on all the seas have crossed their flight. Against the Teucrians the forces of sky and sea are spent. What hath availed me Syrtes or Scylla? What desolate Charybdis? They find shelter in their desired Tiber bed, careless of ocean and of me. Mars availed to destroy the giant race of the Lapithae. The very father of the gods gave over ancient Calydon to Diana's wrath. For forfeit of what crime in the Lapithae, what in the Calydon? But I, Jove's imperial consort, who have borne me to leave naught undared, who have shifted to every device, I am vanquished by Aeneas. If my deity is not great enough, I will not assuredly falter to seek succour where it may be. If the powers of heaven are inflexible, I will stir up Acheron. It may not be to debar him of a Latin realm. Well, and Lavinia is destined his bride unalterably. But it may be yet to defer, to make all this action linger. But it may be yet to waste away the nation of either king. At such forfeit of their people may son-in-law and father-in-law enter into union. Blood of Troy and Rutulia shall be thy dower, O maiden, and Bellona is the bridesmaid who awaits thee. Nor did Cisseus' daughter alone conceive a firebrand and travail of bridal flames. Nay, even such a birth hath Venus of her own, a second Paris, another balefire for Troy towers reborn. These words uttered, she descends to earth in all her terrors, and calls dolorous Alecto from the home of the fatal sisters in nether gloom, whose delight is in woeful wars, in wrath and treachery and evil feuds, hateful to Lord Pluto himself, hateful and horrible to her hell-born sisters. Into so many faces does she turn, so savage the guise of each, so thick and black bristles she with vipers. And her Juno spurs on with words, saying thus: Grant me, virgin born of night, this thy proper task and service, that the rumour of our renown may not crumble away, nor the Aeneadae have power to win Latinus by marriage, or beset the borders of Italy. Thou canst set brothers once united in armed conflict, and overturn families with hatreds. Thou canst launch into houses thy whips and deadly brands. Thine are 1,000 names, 1,000 devices of injury. Stir up thy teeming breast, sunder the peace they have joined, and sow seeds of quarrel. Let all at once desire and demand and seize on arms. Thereon Alecto, steeped in Gorgonian venom, first seeks Latium and the high house of the Laurentine monarch, and silently sits down before Amata's doors, whom a woman's distress and anger heated to frenzy over the Teucrians' coming and the marriage of Turnus. At her the goddess flings a snake out of her dusky tresses, and slips it into her bosom to her very inmost heart, that she may embroil all her house under its maddening magic. Sliding between her raiment and smooth breasts, it coils without touch, and instills its viperous breath unseen. The great serpent turns into the twisted gold about her neck, turns into the long ribbon of her chaplet, enweaves her hair, and winds slippery over her body. And while the gliding infection of the clammy poison begins to penetrate her sense, and run in fire through her frame, nor as yet hath all her breast caught fire, softly she spoke, and in mother's wonted wise, with many a tear over her daughter and the Phrygian bridal: Is it to exiles, to Teucrians, that Lavinia is proffered in marriage, O father? And hast thou no compassion on thy daughter and on thyself, no compassion on her mother, whom with the first northern wind the treacherous rover will abandon, steering to sea with his maiden prize? Is it not thus the Phrygian herdsman wound his way to Lacedaemon, and carried Leda's Helen into the Trojan towns? Where is thy plighted faith? Where thine ancient care for thy people, and the hand Turnus thy kinsman hath so often clasped? If one of alien race from the Latins is sought for our son, if this stands fixed, and thy father Faunus' commands are heavy upon thee, all the land whose freedom severs it from our sway is to my mind alien, and of this is the divine word. And Turnus, if one retrace the earliest source of his line, is born of Inachus and Acrisius, and of the midmost of Mycenae. When in this vain essay of words she sees Latinus fixed against her, and the serpent's maddening poison is sunk deep in her vitals, and runs through and through her. Then indeed, stung by infinite horrors, hapless and frenzied, she rages wildly through the endless city. As will a top flying under the twisted whipcord, which boys busy at their play drive circling wide round an empty hall, runs before the lash and spins in wide gyrations. The witless ungrown band hang wondering over it and admire the whirling boxwood. The strokes lend it life. With pace no slacker is she borne midway through towns and valiant nations. Nay, she flies into the woodland, under feigned Bacchic influence, assumes a greater guilt, arouses a greater frenzy, and hides her daughter in the mountain coverts, to rob the Teucrians of their bridal, and stay the marriage torches. Hail, Bacchus, she shrieks and clamours, thou only art worthy of the maiden, for to thee she takes up the lissom wands, thee she circles in the dance, to thee she trains and consecrates her tresses. Rumour flies abroad, and the matrons, their breasts kindled by the Furies, run all at once with a single ardour to seek out strange dwellings. They have left their homes empty, they throw neck and hair free to the winds, while others fill the air with ringing cries, girt about with fawn skins, and carrying spears of vine. Amid them the infuriate queen holds her blazing pine torch on high, and chants the wedding of Turnus and her daughter, and rolling her bloodshot greys, cries sudden and harsh, Hear, O mothers of Latium, wheresoever you be, if unhappy Amata hath yet any favour in your affection, if care for a mother's right pierces you, untie the chaplets from your hair, begin the orgies with me. Thus, amid woods and wild beasts' solitary places, does Alecto goad the queen with the encircling Bacchic madness. End of section 13.
Section 14 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary J. The Aeneid by Virgil. Translated by J.W. McHale. Book 7th, The Landing in Latium and the Roll of the Armies of Italy, Part 2. When their frenzy seemed heightened and her first task complete, the purpose in all the house of Latinus turned upside down, the dolorous goddess flies on thence, soaring on dusky wing to the walls of the gallant Rutulian, the city which Danae, they say, borne down on the boisterous south wind, built and planted with the Chrysians' people. The place was called Ardea once of old, and still Ardea remains a mighty name, but its fortune is no more. Here in his high house Turnus now took rest in the black midnight. Alecto puts off her grim feature in the body of a Fury. She transforms her face to an aged woman's, and furrows her brow with ugly wrinkles. She puts on white tresses chaplet bound, and entwines them with an olive spray. She becomes aged Caleb, priestess of Juno's temple, and presents herself before his eyes, uttering thus, Turnus, wilt thou brook all these toils poured out in vain, and the conveyance of thy crown to Dardanian settlers? The king denies thee thy bride, and the dower thy blood had earned, and a foreigner is sought for heir to the kingdom. Forth now, dupe, and face thankless perils. Forth, cut down the Tyrrhenian lines. Give the Latins peace and thy protection. This Saturn's omnipotent daughter in very presence commanded me to pronounce to thee as thou wert lying in the still night. Wherefore arise, and make ready with good cheer to arm thy people, and march through thy gates to battle, consume those Phrygian captains that lie with their painted holes in the beautiful river. All the force of heaven orders thee on. Let King Latinus himself know of it, unless he consents to give thee thy bridal, and abide by his words when he shall at last make proof of Turnus's arms. But he, deriding her inspiration, with the words of his mouth, thus answers her again. The fleets ride on the Tiber wave. That news hath not, as thou deemest, escaped mine ears. Frame not such terrors before me. Neither is Queen Juno forgetful of us. But thee, O mother, overworn old age, exhausted and untrue, frets with vain distress, and amid embattled kings mocks thy presage with false dismay. Thy charge is to keep the divine image in temple. War and peace shall be in the hands of men and warriors. At such words Alecto's wrath blazed out, but amid his utterance a quick shudder overruns his limbs. His eyes are fixed in horror, so thickly hiss the snakes of the Fury, so vast her form expands. Then, rolling her fiery eyes, she thrust him back as he would stammer out more, raised two serpents in her hair, and, sounding her whip, resumed with furious tone, Behold me the overworn, me whom old age, exhausted and untrue, mocks with false dismay amid embattled kings. Look on this! I am come from the home of the dread sisters. War and death are in my hand." So speaking, she hurled her torch at him, and pierced his breast with the lurid smoking brand. He breaks from sleep in overpowering fear, his limbs and body bathed in sweat that breaks out all over him. He shrieks madly for arms, searches for arms, on his bed and in his palace. The passion of the sword rages high, the accursed fury of war, and wrath over all. Even as when flaming sticks are heaped roaring loud under the sides of a seething cauldron, and the boiling water leaps up, the river of water within smokes furiously and swells high in overflowing foam, and now the wave contains itself no longer, the dark steam flies aloft. So, for the stain of the broken peace, he orders his chief warriors to march on King Latinus, and bids prepare for battle to defend Italy and drive the foe from their borders. Himself will suffice for Trojans and Latins together. When he uttered these words and called the gods to hear his vows, the Rutulians stir one another up to arms. One is moved by the splendor of his youthful beauty, one by his royal ancestry, another by the noble deeds of his hand. While Turnus fills the Rutulian minds with valor, Alecto, on Stygian wing, hastens towards the Trojans. With fresh wiles she marked the spot where beautiful Iülus was trapping and coursing game on the bank. Here the infernal maiden suddenly crosses his hounds with the maddening touch of a familiar scent, and drives them hotly on the stag hunt. This was the source and spring of ill, and kindled the country folk to war. The stag, beautiful and high-antlered, was stolen from his mother's udder and bred by Tyreus's boys and their father Tyreus, master of the royal herds and ranger of the plain. Their sister Silvia tamed him to her rule, and lavished her care on his adornment, twining his antlers with delicate garlands, and combed his wild coat and washed him in the clear spring. Tamed to her hand, and familiar to his master's table, he would wander the woods, and, however late the night, return home to the door he knew. Far astray, he floated idly down the stream, and allayed his heat on the green bank, when Iülus' mad hounds started him in their hunting, and Ascanius himself, kindled with desire of the chief honor, aimed a shaft from his bended bow. A present deity suffered not his hand to stray, and the loud whistling reed came driven through his belly and flanks. But the wounded beast fled within the familiar roof, and crept moaning to the courtyard, dabbled with blood, and filling all the house with moans, as of one beseeching. Sister Silvia, smiting her arms with open hands, begins to call for aid, and gathers the hardy rustics with her cries. They, for a fell destroyer is hidden in the silent woodland, are there before her expectation, one armed with a stake hardened in the fire, one with a heavy knotted trunk. What each one searches and finds, wrath turns into a weapon. Tyreus cheers on his array, panting hard, with his axe caught up in his hand, as he was happily splitting an oaken log in 4 clefts with cross-driven wedges. But the grim goddess, seizing from her watch-tower the moment of mischief, seeks the steep farm roof and sounds the pastoral war-note from the ridge, straining the infernal cry on her twisted horn. It spread shuddering over all the woodland and echoed through the deep forests. The lake of Trivia heard it afar, Nar River heard it with white sulphurous water, and the springs of Velinus, and fluttered mothers clasped their children to their breast. Then, hurrying to the voice of the terrible trumpet note, on all sides the wild rustics snatch their arms and stream in. Therewithal the men of Troy pour out from their camp's open gates to succor Ascanius. The lines are ranged. Not now in rustic strife do they fight with hard trunks or burned stakes. The two-edged steel sways the fight. The broad cornfields bristle dark with drawn swords, and brass flashes smitten by the sunlight, and casts a gleam high into the cloudy air, as when the wind begins to blow and the flood to whiten. Gradually the sea lifts his waves higher and yet higher, then rises from the bottom right into the air. Here in the front rank young Almo, once Tyreus' eldest son, is struck down by a whistling arrow, for the wound, staying in his throat, cut off blood and the moist voice's passage, and the thin life. Around many a one lies dead, aged Galesus among them, slain as he throws himself between them for a peacemaker, once incomparable in justice and wealth of Azonian fields. For him 5 flocks bleated, a 5-fold herd returned from pasture, and 100 ploughs upturned the soil. But while thus in even battle they fight on the broad plain, the goddess, her promise fulfilled, when she hath dyed the war in blood and mingled death in the first encounter, quits Hesperia, and, glancing through the sky, addresses Juno in exultant tone. Lo, discord is ripened at thy desire into baleful war. Tell them now to mix in amity and join alliance. Insomuch as I have imbued the Trojans in Ausonian blood, this likewise will I add, if I have assurance of thy will. With my rumors I will sweep the bordering towns into war and kindle their spirit with furious desire for battle, that from all quarters help may come. I will sow the land with arms." Then Juno, answering, "Terror and harm is wrought abundantly. The springs of war are aflow, they fight with arms in their grasp, the arms that chance first supplied, that fresh blood stains. Let this be the union, this the bridal, that Venus' illustrious progeny and Latinus the king shall celebrate. Our Lord who reigns on Olympus' summit would not have thee stray too freely in heaven's upper air. Withdraw thy presence, whatsoever future remains in the struggle, that I myself will sway." Such accents uttered the daughter of Saturn, and the other raises her rustling snaky wings and darts away from the high upper air to Cocytus her home. There is a place midmost of Italy, deep in the hills, notable and famed of rumor in many a country, the Vale of Amsanctus. On either hand a wooded ridge, dark with thick foliage, hems it in, and midway a torrent in swirling eddies shivers and echoes over the rocks. Here is shown a ghastly pool, a breathing hole of the grim lord of hell, and a vast chasm breaking into Acheron yawns with pestilential throat. In it the Fury sank, and relieved earth and heaven of her hateful influence. But therewithal the queenly daughter of Saturn puts the last touch to war. The shepherds pour in full tale from the battlefield into the town, bearing back their slain, the boy Almo in Galasius' disfigured face, and cry on the gods and call on Latinus. Turnus is there, and amid the heat and outcry at the slaughter redoubles his terrors, crying that Teucrians are bidden to the kingdom, that a Phrygian race is mingling its taint with theirs, and he is thrust out of their gates. They too, the matrons of whose kin, struck by Bacchus, trample in choirs down the pathless woods, nor is Amata's name a little thing. They too gather together from all sides, and weary themselves with the battle cry. Omens and oracles of gods go down before them, and all under malign influence clamor for awful war. Emulously they surround Latinus' royal house. He withstands, even as a rock in ocean unremoved, as a rock in ocean when the great crash comes down, firm in its own mass among many waves slapping all about. In vain the crags and boulders hiss round it and foam, and the seaweed on its side is flung up and sucked away. But when he may in no wise overbear their blind counsel, and all goes at fierce Juno's beck, with many an appeal to gods and void sky, "Alas!" he cries, "we are broken of fate and driven helpless in the storm. With your very blood you will pay the price of this, O wretched men. Thee, O Turnus, thy crime, thee thine awful punishment shall await. Too late wilt thou address to heaven thy prayers and supplication. For my rest was won, and my haven full at hand. I am robbed but of a happy death." And without further speech he shut himself in the palace, and dropped the reins of the state. There was a use in Hesperian Latium, which the Alban towns kept in holy observance, now Rome keeps, the mistress of the world, when they stir the war god to enter battle, whether their hands prepare to carry war and weeping among Getae or Hyrcanians, or Arabs, or to reach to India and pursue the dawn, and reclaim their standards from the Parthian. There are twain gates of war, so runs their name, consecrate in grim Mars's sanctity and terror. 100 bolts of brass and masses of everlasting iron shut them fast, and Janus the guardian never sets foot from their threshold. There, when the sentence of the fathers stands fixed for battle, the consul, arrayed in the robe of Quirinus and the Gabine cincture, with his own hand unbars the grating doors, with his own lips calls battle forth, and then all the rest follow on, and the brazen trumpets blare harsh with consenting breath. With this use then likewise they bade Latinus proclaim war on the Aeneadae, and unclose the baleful gates. He withheld his hand and shrank away, averse from the abhorred service, and hid himself blindly in the dark. Then the Saturnian queen of heaven glided from the sky, with her own hand thrust open the lingering gates, and swung sharply back on their hinges the iron-bound doors of war. Ausonia is ablaze, till then unstirred and immovable. Some make ready to march afoot over the plains. Some, mounted on tall horses, ride amain in clouds of dust. All seek out arms, and now they rub their shields smooth, and make their spearheads glitter with fat lard, and grind their axes on the whetstone. Rejoicingly they advance under their standards, and hear the trumpet note. 5 great cities set up the anvil and sharpen the sword. Strong Atina, and proud Tiber, Ardea, and Crustumeri, and turreted Antemne. They hollow out headgear to guard them, and plate wickerwork round shield bosses. Others forge breastplates of brass or smooth greaves of flexible silver. To this is come the honor of share and pruning hook. To this all the love of the plough. They retemper their fathers' swords in the furnace, and now the trumpets blare, the watchword for war passes along. One snatches a helmet hurriedly from his house, another backs his neighing horses into the yoke, and arrays himself in shield and mail coat triple linked with gold, and girds on his trusty sword. Open now the gates of Helicon, goddesses, and stir the song of the kings that rose for war, the array that followed each and filled the plains, the men that even then blossomed, the arms that blazed in Italy, the bountiful land. For you remember, divine ones, and you can recall. To us but a breath of rumor, scant and slight, is wafted down. First from the Tyrrhene coast, savage Mezentius, scorner of the gods, opens the war and arrays his columns. By him is Lausus his son, unexcelled in bodily beauty by any save Laurentine Turnus. Lausus, tamer of horses and destroyer of wild beasts, he leads 1,000 men who followed him in vain from Agila town, worthy to be happier in ancestral rule, and to have other than Mezentius for father. After them the beautiful Aventinus, born of beautiful Hercules, displays on the sward his palm-covered chariot and victorious horses, and carries on his shield his father's device, the 100 snakes of the Hydra's serpent wreath. Him, in the wood of the hill Aventine, Rhea the priestess bore by stealth into borders of light a woman mingled with a god. And after the Terinthian conqueror had slain Geryon and set foot on the fields of Laurentum, and bathed his Iberian oxen in the Tuscan river. These carry for war javelins and grim stabbing weapons, and fight with the round shaft and sharp point of the Sabellian pike. Himself he went on foot, swathed in a vast lion skin, shaggy with bristling terrors, whose white teeth encircled his head, and such wild dress the garb of Hercules clasped over his shoulders he entered the royal house. Next, twin brothers leave Tibur town, and the people, called by their brother Tiburtus's name, Catillus and valiant Chorus, the Argives, and advance in the forefront of battle among the throng of spears, as when 2 cloud-born centaurs descend from a lofty mountain peak, leaving Homel or snowy Othrys in rapid race. The mighty forest yields before them as they go, and the crashing thickets give them way. Nor was the founder of Praeneste's city absent, the king who, as every age hath believed, was born of Vulcan among the pasturing herbs, and found beside the hearth Sacalus. On him a rusty battalion attends in loose order, they who dwell in steep Praeneste, in the fields of Juno of Gabi, on the cool Anio and the Hernican rocks, dewy with streams, they whom rich Anagnia, in whom thou, Lord of Maecenas, pasturest. Not all of them have armor, nor shields and clattering chariots. The most part shower bullets of dull lead, some wield in their hand 2 darts, and have for head covering caps of tawny wolfskin. Their left foot is bare wherewith to plant their steps, the other is covered with a boot of rawhide. But Messapus, tamer of horses, the seed of Neptune, whom none might ever strike down with steel or fire, calls quickly to arms his long unstirred peoples, and bands disused to war, and again handles the sword. These are of the Fescennine ranks, and the Aequifalisci, these of Soracte's fortresses, and the fields of Flavina, in Seminus' lake and hill, and the groves of Capena. They marched in even time, singing their king. And whilom snowy swans among the thin clouds, when they return from pasturage, and utter resonant notes through their long necks. Far off echoes the river and the smitten Asian fen, nor would one think these vast streaming masses were ranks clad in brass, rather that, high in air, a cloud of hoarse birds from the deep gulf was pressing to the shore. Lo, Clausus of the ancient Sabine blood, leading a great host himself, from whom now the Claudian tribe and family is spread abroad since Rome was shared with the Sabines. Alongside is the broad battalion of Amiternum, and the old Latins, and all the force of Aretum and Mutuscan olivyards. They who dwell in Nomentum town in the Rosian country by Valinus, who keeps the crags of rough Tetrica and Mount Severus, Casperia and Feruli, and the river of Himela, they who drink of Tiber and Fabaris, they who cold Nursia hath sent, and the squadrons of Horta and the tribes of Latinium, and they whom Alia, the ill-ominous name, servers with its current, as many of the waves that roll on the Libyan sea-floor when the fierce Orion sets in the wintry surge, as thick as the ears that ripen in the morning sunlight on the plain of the Hermus or the yellowing Lycian Tith. Their shields clatter, and earth is amazed under the trampling of their feet. Here Agamemnonian Halesus, foe of the Trojan name, yanks his chariot horses and draws 1,000 warlike peoples to Turnus, those who turn with spades the mastic soil that is glad with wine, whom the elders of Arunca sent from their high hills, and the Sidicine low country hard by, and those who leave Challis, and the dweller by the shallows of the Volturnus river, and side by side the rough Siticulan and the Oscan bands. Polished maces are their weapons. In these it is their wont to fit with a tough thong. A target covers their left side, and for close fighting they have crooked swords. Nor shalt thou, Ebalus, depart untold of in our verses, who wast born, men say, by the nymph Sabethus to Telon, when he grew old in rule over Caprae, the Teleboic realm. But not so content with his ancestral fields, his son even held down in wide sway the Cerastian peoples in the meadows watered by Sarnus, and the dwellers in Rufrae and Batolim, in the fields of Selemne, and they on whom from her apple orchards a Bella city looks down. Their wont was to hurl lances in Teutonic fashion. Their head covering was stripped bark of the cork tree, their shield plates glittering brass their sword. Thee too, Fens, mountainous Nurse sent forth to battle, of noble fame and prosperous arms, whose race on the stiff Aquiculan clods is rough beyond all other, and bred to continual hunting in the woodland. They till the soil in arms, and it is ever their delight to drive in fresh spoils and live on plunder. Furthermore there came, sent by King Archippus, the priest of the Maruvian people, dressed with prosperous olive leaves over his helmet, Umbro excellent in valor, who was wont with charm and touch to sprinkle slumberous dew on the viper's brood and water snakes of noisome breath. Yet he availed not to heal the stroke of the Dardanian spear-point, nor was the wound of him helped by his sleepy charms and herbs called on the Massic hills. Thee the woodland of Angitia, thee Phoenicus's glassy wave, thee the clear pools wept. Likewise the seed of Hippolytus marched to war, Virbius most excellent in beauty, sent by his mother Aricia. The groves of Egeria nursed him round the spongy shore where Diana's altar stands rich and gracious. For they saw in story that Hippolytus, after he fell by his stepmother's treachery, torn asunder by his frightened horses to fulfill a father's revenge, came again to the daylight in heaven's upper air, recalled by Diana's love and the drugs of the healer. Then the Lord Omnipotent, indignant that any mortal should rise from the nether shades to the light of life, launched his thunder and hurled down to the Stygian water the Phoebus-born, the discoverer of such craft and cure. But Trivia the bountiful hides Hippolytus in a secret habitation, and sends him away to the nymph Egeria, in the woodlands keeping, where, solitary in Italian forests, he should spend an inglorious life, and have Virbius for his altered name. Whence also hoofed horses are kept away from Trivia's temple and consecrated groves, because, affrighted at the portents of the sea, they overset the chariot and flung him out upon the shore. Notwithstanding did his son train his ruddy steeds on the level plain, and sped charioted to war. Himself too among the foremost, splendid in beauty of body, Turnus moves armed, and towers a whole head over all. His lofty helmet, triple tressed with horsehair, holds high a chimera breathing from her throat Aenean fires, raging the more and exasperate with baleful flames as the battle and bloodshed grow fiercer. But on his polished shield was emblazoned in gold, low with uplifted horns, already a heifer and overgrown with hair, a lofty design, and Argus the maiden's warder, and Lord Inachus pouring his stream from his embossed urn. Behind comes a cloud of infantry, and shielded columns thicken over all the plains. The Argive men and Auruncan forces, the Rutulians and the old Sicanians, the Socranian ranks and the Betians with painted shields, they who till thy dells, O Tiber, and Numicus' sacred shore, and whose plowshare goes up and down on the Rutulian hills and the Circean headland, over whose fields of Jupiter Anxur washes, and Feronia glad in her greenwood, and where the marsh of Satyra lies black, and cold Ufens wins his way along the valley bottoms and sinks into the sea. Therewithal came Camilla the Volscian, leading a train of cavalry, squadrons splendid with brass, a warrior maiden who had never used her woman's hands to Minerva's distaff or wool baskets, but hardened to endure the battle shock and outstrip the winds with racing feet. She might have flown across the topmost blades of unmown corn, and left the tender ears unhurt as she ran, or sped her way over mid-sea upborne by the swelling flood, nor dipped her swift feet in the water. All the people pour from house and field, and mothers crowd to wander and gaze at her as she goes, in rapturous astonishment at the royal lustre of purple that drapes her smooth shoulders, at the clasp of gold that intertwines her tresses, at the Lycian quiver she carries, in the pastoral myrtle shaft topped with steel. End of section 14.
Section 15 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by J.W. McHale. Book 8th, The Embassage to Evander, Part 1. When Turnus ran up the flag of war on the towers of Laurentum, and the trumpets blared with harsh music, when he spurred his fiery steeds and clashed his armour, straightway men's hearts are in tumult. All Latium at once flutters in banded uprisal, and her warriors rage furiously. Their chiefs, Messapus and Ufens and Mezentius, scorner of the gods, begin to enrol forces on all sides, and dispeople the wide fields of husbandmen. Venulus too is sent to the town of mighty Diomede to seek succour, to instruct him that Teucrians set foot in Latium, that Aeneas in his fleet invades them with the vanquished gods of his home, and proclaims himself the king summoned of fate, that many tribes join the Dardanian, and his name swells high in Latium. What he will rear on these foundations, what issue of battle he desires if fortune attend him, lies clearer to his own sight than to King Turnus or King Latinus. Thus was it in Latium, and the hero of Laomedon's blood, seeing it all, tosses on a heavy surge of care, and throws his mind rapidly this way and that, and turns it on all hands in swift change of thought, even as when the quivering light of water brimming in brass, struck back from the sunlight or the moon's glittering reflection, flickers abroad over all the room, and now mounts aloft and strikes the high panelled roof. Night fell, and over all lands weary creatures were fast in deep slumber, the race of fowl and of cattle, when Lord Aeneas, sick at heart of the dismal warfare, stretched him on the river bank under the cope of the cold sky, and let sleep, though late, overspread his limbs. To him the very god of the ground, the pleasant Tiber stream, seemed to raise his aged form among the poplar boughs. Thick lawn veiled him with its grey covering, and shadowy reeds hid his hair. Thereon he addressed him thus, and with these words allayed his distresses: O born of the family of the gods, thou who bearest back our Trojan city from hostile hands, and keepest Troy towers in eternal life, O long looked for on Laurentine ground and Latin fields, here is thine assured home, thine home's assured gods. Draw not thou back, nor be alarmed by menace of war. All the anger and wrath of the gods is passed away, and even now for thine assurance, that thou think not this the idle fashioning of sleep, a great sow shall be found lying under the oaks on the shore, with her new-born litter of 30 head. White she couches on the ground, and the brood about her teats is white. By this token in 30 revolving years shall Ascanius found a city, Alba of bright name. My prophecy is sure. Now hearken, and I will briefly instruct thee how thou mayest unravel and overcome thy present task. An Arcadian people sprung of Pallas, following in their king Evander's company beneath his banners, have chosen a place in these coasts, and set a city on the hills, called Pallanteum, after Pallas their forefather. These wage perpetual war with the Latin race. These do thou take to thy camp's alliance, and join with them in league. Myself I will lead thee by my banks and straight along my stream, that thou mayest oar thy way upward against the river. Up and arise, goddess born, and even with the setting stars address thy prayers to Juno as is meet, and vanquish her wrath and menaces with humble vows. To me thou shalt pay a conqueror's sacrifice. I am he whom thou seest washing the banks with full flood, and severing the rich tilth, glassy Tiber, best beloved by heaven of rivers. Here is my stately home, my fountain head is among high cities. Thus spoke the river, and sank in the depth of the pool. Night and sleep left Aeneas. He arises, and looking towards the radiant sky of the sun-rising, holds up water from the river in fitly hollowed palms, and pours to heaven these accents: Nymphs, Laurentine nymphs, from whom is the generation of rivers, and thou, O father Tiber, with thine holy flood, receive Aeneas, and deign to save him out of danger. What pool soever holds thy source, who pitiest our discomforts, from whatsoever soil thou dost spring excellent in beauty, ever shall my worship, ever my gifts frequent thee, the horned river lord of Hesperian waters. Ah, be thou only by me, and graciously confirm thy will. So speaks he, and chooses 2 galleys from his fleet, and mans them with rowers, and withal equips a crew with arms. And lo! suddenly, ominous and wonderful to tell, the milk-white sow, of one colour with her white brood, is espied through the forest couched on the green brink, whom to thee, yes, to thee, queenly Juno, good Aeneas offers in sacrifice, and sets with her offspring before thine altar. All that night long Tiber assuaged his swelling stream, and silently stayed his refluent wave, smoothing the surface of his waters to the fashion of still pool and quiet mere, to spare labour to the oar. So they set out, and sped on their way with prosperous cries. The painted fir slides along the waterway. The waves and unwonted woods marvel at their far-gleaming shields, and the gay hulls afloat on the river. They outwear a night and a day in rowing, ascend the long reaches, and pass under the checkered shadows of the trees, and cut through the green woodland in the calm water. The fiery sun had climbed midway in the circle of the sky, when they see afar fortress walls and scattered house roofs, where now the might of Rome hath risen high as heaven. Then Evander held a slender state. Quickly they turn their prows to land, and draw near the town. It chanced on that day the Arcadian king paid his accustomed sacrifice to the great son of Amphitryon, and all the gods in a grove before the city. With him his son Pallas, with him all the chief of his people, and his poor senate were offering incense, and the blood steamed warm at their altars. When they saw the high ships, saw them glide up between the shady woodlands and rest on their silent oars, the sudden sight appalls them, and all at once they rise and stop the banquet. Pallas courageously forbids them to break off the rites. Snatching up a spear, he flies forward, and from a hillock cries afar, O men, what cause hath driven you to explore these unknown ways? Or whither do you steer? What is your kin? Whence your habitation? Is it peace or arms you carry hither? Then from the lofty stern Lord Aeneas thus speaks, stretching forth in his hand an olive bough of peace-bearing: Thou seest men born of Troy, and arms hostile to the Latins, who have driven us to flight in insolent warfare. We seek Evander. Carry this message, and tell him that chosen men of the Dardanian captains are come pleading for an armed alliance. Pallas stood amazed at the august name. Descend, he cries, whoso thou art, and speak with my father face to face, and enter our home and hospitality. And giving him the grasp of welcome, he caught and clung to his hand. Advancing, they enter the grove and leave the river. Then Aeneas in courteous words addresses the king: Best of the Grecian race, thou whom fortune hath willed that I supplicate, holding before me boughs dressed in fillets, no fear stayed me because thou wert a Grecian chief and an Arcadian, or allied by descent to the twin sons of Atreus. Nay, mine own prowess and the sanctity of divine oracles, our ancestral kinship, and the fame of thee that is spread abroad over the earth, have allied me to thee, and led me willingly on the path of fate. Dardanus, who sailed to the Teucrian land, the first father and founder of the Ilian city, was born, as Greeks relate, of Electra the Atlantid. Electra's sire is ancient Atlas, whose shoulder sustains the heavenly spheres. Your father is Mercury, whom white Maia conceived and bore on the cold summit of Cyllene. But Maia, if we give any credence to report, is daughter of Atlas, that same Atlas who bears up the starry heavens. So both our families branch from a single blood. In this confidence I sent no embassy, I framed no crafty overtures. Myself I have presented mine own person, and come a suppliant to thy courts. The same Dornian race pursues us and thee in merciless warfare. We once expelled, They trust nothing will withhold them from laying all Hesperia wholly beneath their yoke, and holding the seas that wash it above and below. Accept and return our friendship. We can give brave hearts in war, high souls and men approved in deeds." Aeneas ended. The other ere now scanned in a long gaze the face and eyes and all the form of the speaker, then thus briefly returns: "How gladly, bravest of the Teucrians, do I hail and own thee! How I recall thy father's words and the very tone and glance of great Anchises! For I remember how Priam, son of Laomedon, when he sought Salamis on his way to the realm of his sister Hesione, went on to visit the cold borders of Arcadia. Then early youth clad my cheeks with bloom. I admired the Teucrian captains, admired their lord, the son of Laomedon. But Anchises moved high above them all. My heart burned with youthful passion to accost him and clasp hand in hand. I made my way to him, and led him eagerly to Pheneus' high town. Departing, he gave me an adorned quiver and Lycian arrows, a scarf inwoven with gold, and a pair of golden bits that now my Pallas possesses. Therefore my hand is already joined in the alliance you seek, and soon as tomorrow's dawn rises again over earth, I will send you away rejoicing in mine aid, and supply you from my store. Meanwhile, since you are come hither in friendship, solemnize with us these yearly rites which we may not defer, and even now learn to be familiar at your comrades' board." This said, he commands the feast and the wine cups to be replaced whence they were taken, and with his own hand ranges them on the grassy seat, and welcomes Aeneas to the place of honour, with a lion's shaggy fell for cushion, and a hospitable chair of maple. Then chosen men with the priest of the altar in emulous haste bring roasted flesh of bulls, and pile baskets with the gift of ground corn, and serve the wine. Aeneas and the men of Troy with him feed on the long chines of oxen and the entrails of the sacrifice. After hunger is driven away and the desire of food stayed, King Evander speaks: "No idle superstition that knows not the gods of old ordered these our solemn rites, this customary feast, this altar of august sanctity. Saved from bitter perils, O Trojan guest, do we worship, and most due are the rites we inaugurate. Look now first on this overhanging cliff of stone, where shattered masses lie strewn, and the mountain dwelling stands desolate, and rocks are rent away in vast ruin. Here was a cavern, awful and deep withdrawn, impenetrable to the sunbeams, where the monstrous half-human shape of Cacus had his hold. The ground was ever wet with fresh slaughter, and pallid faces of men, ghastly with gore, hung nailed on the haughty doors. This monster was the son of Vulcan, and spouted his black fires from his mouth as he moved in giant bulk. To us also in our desire time bore a god's aid and arrival. For princely Alcides, the avenger, came glorious in the spoils of triple Geryon slain. This way the conqueror drove the huge bulls, and his oxen filled the river valley. But savage Cacus, infatuate to leave nothing undared or unhandled in craft or crime, drives 4 bulls of choice shape away from their pasturage, and as many heifers of excellent beauty, and these, that there should be no straightforward footprints, he dragged by the tail into his cavern, the track of their compelled path reversed, and hid them behind the screen of rock. No marks were there to lead a seeker to the cavern. Meanwhile the son of Amphitryon, his herds filled with food, was now breaking up his pasturage and making ready to go. The oxen low as they depart. All the woodland is filled with their complaint as they clamorously quit the hills. One heifer returned the cry, and lowing from the depth of the dreary cave, baffled the hope of Cacus from her imprisonment. At this the grief and choler of Alcides blazed forth dark and infuriate. Seizing in his hand his club of heavy knotted oak, he seeks with swift pace the airy mountain steep. Then, as never before, did we see Cacus afraid and his countenance troubled. He goes flying swifter than the wind, and seeks his cavern. Fear wings his feet. As he shut himself in, and bursting the chains dropped the vast rock slung in iron by his father's craft, and blocked the doorway with its pressure, lo, The Tarinthian came in furious wrath, and scanning all the entry, turned his face this way and that, and ground his teeth. Thrice, hot with rage, he circles all Mount Aventine. Thrice he assails the rocky portals in vain. Thrice he sinks down, outwearied, in the valley. There stood a sharp rock of flint, with sides cut sheer away, rising over the cavern's ridge a vast height to see, fit haunt for foul birds to build on. This, for, sloping from the ridge, it leaned on the left towards the river, he loosened, urging it from the right till he tore it loose from its deep foundations, then suddenly shook it free. With the shock the vast sky thunders, the banks leap apart, and the amazed river recoils. But the den, Cacus' huge palace, lay open and revealed, and the depths of gloomy cavern were made manifest, even as though some force tearing earth apart should unlock the infernal house and disclose the pallid realms abhorred of heaven. And deep down the monstrous gulf he descried where the ghosts flutter in the streaming daylight. On him then, surprised in unexpected light, shut in the rock's recesses and howling in strange fashion, Alcides from above hurls missiles, and calls all his arms to aid, and presses hard on him with bows and enormous millstones. And he, for none other escape from peril is left, vomits from his throat vast jets of smoke, wonderful to tell, and enwreathes his dwelling in blind gloom, blotting view from the eyes, while in the cave's depth night thickens with smoke bursts in a darkness shot with fire. Alcides broke forth in anger, and with a bound hurled himself sheer amid the flames, where the smoke rolls billowing and voluminous, and the cloud surges black through the enormous den. Here, as Cacus in the darkness spouts forth his idle fires, he grasps and twines tight round him, till his eyes start out, and his throat is drained of blood under the strangling pressure. Straightway the doors are torn open, and the dark house laid plain. The stolen oxen and forsworn plunder are shown forth to heaven, and the misshapen carcass dragged forward by the feet. Men cannot satisfy their soul with gazing on the terrible eyes, the monstrous face, and shaggy bristling chest, and the throat with its quenched fires. Thenceforth this sacrifice is solemnized, and a younger race have gladly kept the day. Potitius the inaugurator, and the Pinarian family, guardians of the rites of Hercules, have set in the grove this altar, which shall ever be called of us most mighty, and shall be our mightiest evermore. Wherefore arise, O men, and enwreathe your hair with leafy sprays, and stretch forth the cups in your hands. Call on our common God, and pour the glad wine. He ended, when the twy-coloured poplar of Hercules hid his shaded hair with pendulous plaited leaf, and the sacred goblet filled his hand. Speedily all pour glad libation on the board, and supplicate the gods. Meanwhile the evening star draws nigher down the slope of heaven, and now the priests went forth, Potitius at their head, girt with skins after their fashion, and bore torches of flame. They renew the banquet, and bring the grateful gift of a second repast, and heap the altars with loaded platters. Then the Salii stand round the lit altar fires to sing, their brows bound with poplar boughs, one chorus of young men, one of elders, and extol in song the praises and deeds of Hercules; how first he strangled in his gripe the twin terrors, the snakes of his stepmother; how he likewise shattered in war famous cities, Troy and Oechalia; how under Eurystheus the king he bore the toil of 1,000 labours by Juno's malign decrees. Thine hand, unconquered, slays the cloud-born double-bodied race, Hylaeus and Pholus, the Cretan monster, and the huge lion in the hollow Nemean rock. Before thee the Stygian pools shook for fear, before thee the warder of hell, couched on half-gnawn bones in his blood-stained cavern. To thee not any form was terrible, not Typhoeus' self towering in arms. Thou wast not bereft of counsel when the snake of Lerna encompassed thee with thronging heads. Hail, true seed of Jove, deified glory! Graciously visit us, and these thy rites, with favourable feet. Such are their songs of praise; they crown all with the cavern of Cacus and its fire-breathing lord. all the woodland echoes with their clamour, and the hills resound. Thence, all at once, the sacred rites accomplished, retraced their way to the city. The age-worn king walked holding Aeneas and his son by his side for companions on his way, and lightened the load with changing talk. Aeneas admires and turns his eyes lightly round, pleased with the country, and gladly on spot after spot inquires and hears of the memorials of earlier men. Then King Evander, founder of the fortress of Rome: in these woodlands dwelt fauns and nymphs sprung of the soil, and a tribe of men born of stocks and hard oak, who had neither law nor grace of life, nor did they know to yoke bulls or lay up stores or save their gains, but were nurtured by the forest boughs and the hard living of the huntsman. Long ago Saturn came from heaven on high, in flight before Jove's arms, an exile from his lost realm. He gathered together the unruly race scattered on the mountain heights, and gave them statutes, and chose Latium to be their name, since in these borders he had found a safe hiding place. Beneath his reign were the ages named of gold. Thus, in peace and quietness, did he rule the nations. Till gradually there crept in a sunken and stained time, the rage of war and the lust of possession. Then came the Ausonian clan and the tribes of Sicania, and many a time the land of Saturn put away her name. Then were kings, and fierce Thybris with his giant bulk, from whose name we of Italy afterwards called the Tiber river, when it lost the true name of old, Albula. Me, cast out from my country and following the utmost limits of the sea, Fortune the omnipotent and irreversible doom settled in this region. And my mother the nymph Carmentis' awful warnings and Apollo's divine counsel drove me hither. Scarce was this said. Next advancing he points out the altar and the Carmental gate, which the Romans call anciently by that name in honour of the nymph Carmentis, seer and soothsayer, who sang of old the coming greatness of the Aeneadae and the glory of Pallanteum. Next he points out the wide grove where valiant Romulus set his sanctuary, and the Lupercal, in the cool hollow of the rock, dedicate to Lycian Pan after the manner of Parasia. Therewithal he shows the holy wood of Argiletum, and calls the spot to witness, as he tells the slaying of his guest Argus. Hence he leads him to the Tarpeian house, and the Capitol golden now, of old rough with forest thickets. Even then men trembled before the wood and rock. This grove, he cries, this hill with its leafy crown, is a god's dwelling, though whose we know not. The Arcadians believe Jove himself hath been visible, when often he shook the darkening aegis in his hand, and gathered the storm clouds. Thou seest these two towns likewise with walls overthrown, relics and memorials of men of old. This fortress Lord Janus built, this Saturn. The name of this one was once Janiculum, of that Saturnia. With such mutual words they drew nigh the house of poor Evander, and saw scattered herds lowing on the Roman Forum and down the gay Carinae. When they reached his dwelling, this threshold, he cries, Alcides the conqueror stooped to cross. In this palace he rested. Dare thou, my guest, to despise riches. Mould thyself to like dignity of godhead, and come not exacting to our poverty. He spoke, and led tall Aeneas under the low roof of his narrow dwelling, and laid him on a couch of stuffed leaves and the skin of a Libyan she-bear. Night falls, and clasps the earth in her dusky wings. End of section 15.